Hi, I'm Nadine. My parents didn't just turn their backs on me, they filed papers to take my son from me. In court. Like I was a stranger. They used my worst moments text messages, photos, a voicemail I barely remembered, to build a story where I didn't belong. And then, my own sister stood up and told the court I was unstable. But the most haunting part? They never expected my 9-year-old son to find their plan folded, hidden, printed out in black and white. Why would parents go that far? What kind of family builds a case to erase their own blood? And what happens when the quietest person in the room is the one holding the truth? I was pouring milk into Ella's cereal when the letter came. It slipped under the door. Just another envelope at first glance. I didn't think much of it, bills maybe. A school reminder. The light outside was still soft, not fully morning, and Ellis was humming some made-up tune between spoonfuls. He asked if Grandma would be coming to his school play next week. I told him I wasn't sure, knowing full well she wouldn't. Not anymore. Then I picked up the envelope. There was a county seal on the front. Heavy paper. My hands stopped moving. I read it once. Then again. My throat dried up. Petition for temporary custody. Filed by Alton and Vera Shipman, my parents. I must have made a noise, a small one, because Ellis looked up and asked if everything was okay. I smiled thin, too quick, and told him to finish his breakfast. My hand trembled as I tucked the letter behind the toaster, like hiding it would undo it. The rest of the morning moved in pieces. I packed Ellis lunch, walked him to school, even waved at the crossing guard like always. But the letter stayed in my head, loud as thunder. My own parents, taking me to court, over my son. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to make sense of the timeline. We'd never been close. Vera made that clear years ago. She said I was dramatic, sensitive, not built for motherhood. I remembered her words after Ellis was born. You're exhausted because you make it hard on yourself. After the divorce, I let them visit Ellis sometimes. Supervised, brief. I thought I was being generous. I thought, maybe peace could be manufactured if I just kept the volume down. But peace wasn't what they wanted. They wanted control. And when they couldn't get it gently, they filed for it. I called Vera. It rang once before she picked up. Did you get the letter? She asked. No warmth. No pretense. You filed for custody, I said. It sounded absurd out loud. This isn't personal, Nadine, she said flatly. We're concerned. Concerned. That word again. A weapon dressed in etiquette. Alton came on the line, his voice clipped like he was giving instructions to a patient. We've consulted professionals. We just want what's best for Ellis. I am what's best for Ellis. It's not about you. I am your daughter. He didn't respond. The line clicked dead. I sat there for several minutes, my hand still holding the phone like it could pull answers through silence. Later that day, my court-appointed liaison emailed me a copy of the filing. Attachments included. A screenshot of an old Facebook post where I'd said, "Some days, I feel like I'm barely keeping up." A voicemail from 2 years ago, crying after Ellis had the flu for 5 nights straight. A private message I sent to a friend after the divorce. I don't know how to be everything at once. Those words scraped from my worst nights were now used as evidence. Emotional instability, social withdrawal, unfit to parent. They cut pieces out of my life, pasted them back together into a story I didn't recognize, then put their names at the bottom as narrators. Ellis came home that evening, excited about something they were building in art class. I nodded, asked questions, made dinner. He didn't notice I only picked at my food. When he fell asleep on the couch, still clutching the dog-eared book he refused to finish without me, I sat beside him and watched the rise and fall of his chest. So steady, so unaware. I opened the drawer beneath the TV stand, slipped the court documents beside Ellis' birth certificate. 2 papers. One that brought him into this world, and one that tried to take him away from me. I thought I had lost enough, I whispered to the room, to the dark. I didn't know yet that what they wanted wasn't custody. It was erasure. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, though the air did bite a little, but in presence. It smelled like paper and polish, and everything echoed a bit too long. My heels clicked against the tile as I walked in, but when I entered the courtroom, I moved quieter, like noise might give them more ground. They were already seated when I arrived. Alton and Vera sat together, upright, faces unreadable. They didn't look at me, not even a flicker. To their right, Isolde's sister was flipping calmly through a thick binder, her hair pinned like she'd stepped out of a political commercial. I took my seat across from them. My hands rested in my lap, not shaking, just heavy. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't concern. This was premeditated. They hadn't come to court to express worry. They'd come to take. When Isolde was called to testify, I already knew what was coming. What I didn't expect was how clean it would sound. She spoke with that calm tone she'd perfected in board meetings and donor luncheons, sequel parts, gentle and firm. She's always had trouble with consistency, Isolde said. There were patterns even when we were teenagers. She'd start things, then drop them. She struggled to maintain boundaries. She mentioned missed lectures in college, a part-time job I quit after 3 weeks. My failure to attend Mom's charity gala the year I was dealing with postpartum fog. It's not about who Nadine is at her best, she said, looking at the judge. It's about who Ellis needs on his worst days. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stared straight ahead, trying to remember if it was this same woman who once held my hand when I was sobbing in the stairwell after failing my biology final, who once whispered, "You don't have to be them, Nadine." I guess I did have to be them if I wanted to stay in the family. The slideshow came next. Their lawyer called it family milestones. Images flashed across the screen, my parents cutting the ribbon at a new church wing. Isolde in cap and gown, family vacations at national parks, Thanksgiving tables filled with smiles. I waited to see myself. I barely appeared. One Christmas photo showed me, blurry in the corner, reaching for a cup. In another, Eid been cropped out altogether. Ellis was shown smiling beside Isolde, her hand on his shoulder. My name wasn't said. My presence was erased. I looked toward the bench. The judge watched quietly, occasionally jotting notes. My own lawyer didn't object. It wasn't illegal to edit memories. I dug my nails into my palm, just to remind myself I still existed. 2 months earlier, Eid received a voicemail from Isolde. At the time, I didn't know what she was trying to say. "I always tried to shield you," she had said, "but now I need to protect what's left." What's left? That phrase burned more now. What was left, apparently, was the version of the family that didn't include me. The version that worked on paper. The one that looked tidy and predictable in court. Maybe they'd kept me on the edge all these years because they didn't know how to make me fit. Maybe it'd always been the draft copy they planned to revise out later. I realized then, my place in this family had always been conditional, and I broke the contract the moment I didn't self-destruct quietly. I thought about standing up, saying something, anything, but I didn't. Instead, I reached into my purse and found the crumpled piece of paper Ellis had drawn for me the week before. A sun, with a tiny house beneath it. Stick figures. One tall, one small, and a caption in crooked handwriting. "Mom and me. We don't need anyone else." I held on to that as the session wrapped. As Isolde laughed softly with the family attorney, I sat still. They didn't come to court to argue. They came to bury me in revision, in reputation, in silence. But I've buried enough pieces of myself for them already. Sunday came and left like a storm I wasn't allowed to name. Ellis was supposed to be dropped off at 6 p.m., like always. He'd cleaned his room earlier that day, folded his favorite blanket at the foot of the bed, even set aside a little plastic robot I found at the grocery store, something small to remind him this place still belonged to him. But 6 came and went. Then 7. Then 8. I called twice. No answer. I texted Vera. "Is he coming home tonight?" Read. No reply. By 9, I was in the car, driving the familiar route to their house, every light red like the world itself had been told to wait. Their porch light was off. Curtains drawn. The car wasn't in the driveway. Nothing stirred. Back home, I sat on Ellis' bed and stared at the digital clock beside his nightlight, 10:47 p.m. I whispered into the voicemail box after the fourth try, trying to keep my voice calm for the record, though my stomach had dropped hours ago. Has not a prize. Has a person. Has my son. I hung up. The silence afterward felt intentional. The next morning, I got a call from the school front desk. Not from Vera. Not from Alton. From the receptionist, polite but confused. "Hi, Ms. Shipman. Ellis was dropped off this morning by his grandmother, and he forgot his lunch. Just making sure someone's bringing it?" That was how I found out my son had been returned. I drove straight there, heart in my throat, lunch in my lap. At the front office, I saw Vera walking out. She didn't look surprised to see me. She didn't even blink. "He seemed more peaceful with us," she said, adjusting her scarf. "It was better that way." I smiled. I didn't know how else to keep from screaming. Inside the school, Ellis ran to hug me like nothing happened. And maybe, to him, nothing had. But to me, everything did. Because when people start making decisions for you, especially about your own child, they've already decided you don't matter. By Wednesday, our next court update was logged in the shared system. I logged in through the portal and scrolled through the newly added affidavits. One line stood out. Evidence of emotional distancing initiated by respondent. There were message screenshots included. A thread between me and Ellis, cropped at just the right places. One line, taken entirely out of context. "Stay close to me. They don't know you like I do." I remembered that message. It was from when he told me Vera had scolded him for crying after a bad dream. I had comforted him, told him his feelings were safe with me. That line, now presented as emotional manipulation, made my chest burn. They weren't just trying to take Ellis. They were trying to paint me as obsessive, possessive, dangerous. Their strategy wasn't legal, it was narrative. They weren't just trying to win. They were trying to rewrite me. That night, Ellis curled beside me on the couch. We were watching one of those old cartoons he liked, something loud and fast, colors flashing every second. But he wasn't really watching. He looked up at me, then away, then back again. "They told me not to call you," he said quietly. "They said you'd be upset." I didn't say anything. I just pulled him closer, my arms wrapping around his shoulders, like a net trying to hold back the ocean. When your child starts choosing who not to hurt, you realize he's already had to grow up. He fell asleep halfway through the show, head against my chest. I watched the light of the screen flicker across his face and wondered how much he understood. Probably more than he should. After tucking him into bed, I opened my laptop. I started collecting things, not just emotions, documents, screenshots, dates, voicemails, school reports. I opened a folder titled Custody Defense and began dropping them in. I saved one of Ellis' journal entries from school. He'd written, in that half-print, half-cursive style of 9-year-olds, "Mom loves me even when I cry. That's how I know she's mine." It felt like a lifeline. I looked at the calendar. Court resumed in 5 days. They wanted to erase me with ink and paper, but I'd answer them with the only thing they didn't expect: the truth. Ellis ran up to me outside the school with the kind of excitement that made you forget for a second everything was falling apart. "Look what Grandma and Grandpa got me!" He held out a shiny new handheld game console one I recognized instantly. It was the same model I'd ordered for him weeks ago, after saving up from a side project I'd done for a local bakery. I'd spent 20 minutes comparing prices, 20 more picking out a case with little cartoon planets on it. But when the package never showed up at my apartment, I assumed it had gotten lost in the holiday shuffle. I smiled, even as my stomach sank. "That's cool, buddy," I said, masking the recognition. "Grandma said they got it just for me, 'cause I've been so good." His voice was bright, full of belief. I waited until after bedtime. Once Ellis was asleep, I pulled up my inbox and searched the tracking number. Delivered to their address. 3 days ago. They had taken the gift I bought, wrapped it in their affection, and handed it to him like they were the givers. Like I was absent. like I didn't exist. It wasn't just a toy. It was affection, redirected, intimacy repackaged. Later that night, as I rinsed dinner plates and put away leftovers, I asked gently, "How did it feel staying at their place this time?" He didn't look up from the kitchen table. "Fine, just fine. They have better snacks, and I can watch whatever." I dried my hands, turned to face him. "Do you feel safe there?" His head bobbed in an almost imperceptible nod. Too quick. Practiced. I didn't ask more. You don't ask a child to choose safety over comfort. You just pay attention to the answers they're not ready to give. After he went to bed, I started sorting through a storage bin in the hallway closet, just to feel like I had control over something. Under a pile of old bibs and formula coupons, I found a yellowed envelope addressed in my handwriting. It was still sealed. He'd written it to my mother, sometime during those early weeks when Ellis wouldn't sleep for more than 90 minutes at a time. My breasts ached, my hair matted, my eyes hollow. I'd written it at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., too afraid to call, too angry to ask for help. "I know I'm not perfect," the letter began, "but I want you to see me. Just see me." I sat on the floor of the hallway and read the whole thing, still sealed, reading through the thin paper. My handwriting curved nervously back then, like even my words were afraid to take up space. I never mailed it. I guess deep down, I knew it wouldn't be read even if I had. That kind of grief doesn't make you cry. It just takes up space inside you and lives there. I folded the envelope back, placed it on the coffee table. I couldn't throw it out. I couldn't deliver it either. I opened my old phone, an older model, cracked at the corner but still functional, and started the camera. It wasn't for court. It wasn't for the lawyer. It was for me. "I don't know what else they'll take," I said into the screen. "But if they keep coming, they're going to find out what happens when you try to erase someone who has nothing left to lose." I saved the video. Didn't send it anywhere. Some truths weren't meant for others to judge. They were meant to keep you steady when the floor moved. The next morning, I dressed in silence, made coffee, packed Ellis lunch. As I reached for my coat, I tucked the letter, the one he'd written years ago, the one no one ever read, into the inner pocket. It didn't change the court's evidence list, but I wasn't walking into that building empty-handed anymore. That letter was never opened. But this story? I won't let them write the last page. The courtroom had a stillness that felt less like silence and more like watching a storm creep in through a sealed window. I sat straighter than I needed to, hands folded, listening to the shuffle of papers and the faint cough of someone behind me. Then they called him, Dr. Harlan Vexley. He walked in like he'd been here before, confident, polished, voice steady. A man used to being believed. A man who never had to explain the spaces between his words. He was introduced as a licensed psychologist, brought in to provide an objective behavioral assessment. But I'd never seen him, never spoken to him, and he had never met Ellis. Still, he spoke with authority, quoting vague studies and naming patterns like inconsistent maternal response and attachment disorganization due to emotional volatility. I felt my shoulders stiffen. Ellismi Ellis was being discussed like a case file, like a collection of checkboxes. The judge asked no questions. My lawyer leaned over, whispered, "Let me do the talking." I nodded, because my voice was already being overwritten in real time. Dr. Vexley claimed Ellis displayed hesitation in relational alignment, that his drawings showed maternal anxiety symbolism, whatever that meant. My son draws dragons and planets 9. Then came the dagger. In my professional opinion, the child's current living environment may be contributing to developmental confusion and emotional unpredictability. I stared at him, my pulse so loud I could barely hear his next sentence. Not once did he say the word love. When it was our turn, my attorney stood and asked plainly, "Dr. Vexley, have you ever observed Ms. Shipman in person?" "No." "Have you ever spoken directly to Ellis Shipman?" "No." "Then your entire testimony is based on documents provided by the plaintiff, correct?" "Correct. It should have been enough to break him. But it wasn't. Because he didn't need facts, just tone. Words like concern, emerging patterns, suggestive behaviors. They floated in the air, dressed like science, but built like insinuation. I sat there, letting each phrase land, letting each pause underline what no one dared say out loud. She is the problem. The judge nodded, made a note. That's all it took. Then came Exhibit B. The plaintiff's counsel handed over a folder marked historical medical concerns. Inside was a document I recognized and didn't. A postpartum evaluation from when Ellis was a newborn. Only it wasn't accurate. The name of the clinic was correct. The counselor's name, yes. But the date was off by a year. And the language? The words weren't mine. It described prolonged episodes of detachment, refusal to breastfeed, and disassociation under stress. I remembered my sessions. They were hard, but I showed up. I cried, I talked. But I was never diagnosed. I was told I was tired, human, new. I leaned in, whispering to my lawyer, "That's not real. That's not what was written." He nodded once, raised his hand. The judge paused and agreed to review the original medical record before ruling on the exhibit's admissibility. But the seed was planted, and they knew it. I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I let the accusation hang in the air and chose to respond with something harder than anger, stillness. Because that's what they were trying to steal. My calm. Vera sat across from me, writing notes like she was documenting a museum display. Isolde sat beside her, arms folded, like she'd already accepted the judge's ruling. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silence was its own declaration. But I wasn't sitting for them. I was sitting for Ellis. I took a breath. They wanted me to crumble, to fit the frame they built. But I wasn't going to oblige them. I could feel the shape of my strength now. Not loud, not sharp, just there. After court, I drove home without music. Ellis was with a sitter. The house felt too still, but for once that wasn't a threat. It was room. I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out the file I'd started 3 weeks earlier. Pay stubs, teacher notes, Ellis attendance record, photos of birthday cakes made in my kitchen, a note from his dentist. No missed appointments. I laid them out like armor. They wanted to bury me under paperwork. I'd answer with mine. And this time, the words would be true. The first thing I noticed was the phrasing. I had gone down to the courthouse clerk's office to request copies of recent filings. It was a routine part of this hellish process, now more folders, more ink, more words meant to reduce my motherhood to a mistake. I was skimming through the latest motion when the language stopped me cold. In a section labeled Custodial Notes, Ellis was referred to as the child of the respondent. Not her son, not Ellis Shipman, just that clinical, distant, and deliberate. The same way you'd describe a missing briefcase or a misplaced invoice. I kept reading. In the part where the court typically lists primary caregiver, the line beside my name was left blank. Blank. I blinked, reread it, and set the paper down slowly, careful not to crumple the edge like it was something alive. My fingers felt colder than they should have, and the room, the beige walls, the fluorescent lighting suddenly pressed in on me like a sealed box. I walked out into the sharp air of the parking lot and sat in my car without turning the engine on. The word respondent echoed louder than the heater ever could. Later that afternoon, I picked Ellis up from school. He was waiting by the main entrance, swinging his backpack like nothing in his world had shifted. His cheeks were red from the cold, his smile unbothered. "They taught us a new song in music today. You want to hear it?" I nodded. "Of course!" He hummed the first few bars as we walked to the car. It was off-key and perfect. I didn't mention the document. I couldn't, because no matter what language the court used, he still called me Mom. At home, I made dinner while he sprawled on the floor, half playing, half humming. I offered to help him clean out his backpack before he returned to his grandparents the next morning. He groaned but agreed. "Let me grab it," he said, dragging it toward the table. As we unzipped compartments and dug through snack wrappers and folded worksheets, something caught my eye. A folded piece of paper tucked in a hidden zipper pouch on the back. "What's this?" Ellis paused. His face went still. "I don't know if I was supposed to take it. I found it at Grandpa House, behind the desk." I opened it slowly. The page was printed, the header marked with a date from 2 months prior. Guardianship Strategy, Contingency Plan A. My vision narrowed. Paragraph after paragraph laid out talking points, phrases to use in court, strategies to emotionally distance Ellis from me while maintaining the appearance of moral clarity. It was signed digitally by someone from a private law office I hadn't heard of before. Ellis stood silently, waiting. I folded the paper shut. "Why didn't you show me sooner?" He hesitated, then said, "I didn't want to make things worse." I thought, maybe it'd be better to wait, for when it really mattered. That undid me. I crouched down, pulled him into my arms, and finally let myself cry. Not loudly, not with drama. Just enough that he felt it on the side of his neck, where my cheek rested. I've been collecting receipts, I thought, but he collected the truth. I didn't ask more. I didn't need to. Whatever instincts I had that were supposedly unstable had raised a boy who knew the weight of silence and when to break it. After he fell asleep, I sat at the dining table with the letter open again. I read every word twice. I scanned it, saved it to a secure folder, and emailed it to my lawyer with a subject line that read, "Found by Ellis. Confirm admissibility." Then I whispered something aloud, to no one. They made their move. Now I'll make mine. I slipped the paper into a plastic sleeve and filed it in my binder. A quiet weapon, because no one expects a mother to fight back with silence, until that silence holds their secrets. The manila folder under my arm felt heavier than it was. I clutched it like armor as I walked into the courtroom that morning, my heels firm against the tile floor. Not fast, not slow, just deliberate. My attorney met me at the table, already aware. "We got the confirmation," he said, nodding toward the folder. "It's admissible." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I just placed the folder gently in front of him, like it was a torch ready to burn everything down. Across the aisle, Alton sat stiffly. His mouth was tight. Vera was too busy pretending to take notes to make eye contact. Isolde looked at her phone, poised like this was just another meeting to get through. But I watched my father's jaw shift when the judge called for the submitted material to be read aloud. "Counsel, please proceed with Exhibit 12, the judge said. My lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this document was recovered by the minor child and brought forward by the respondent. It is titled Guardianship Strategy, Contingency, Plan A." The clerk handed copies to the judge and the opposing table. There was a silence before the judge began to read. Ensure emotional framing that highlights respondent's instability without initiating direct character attacks. Utilize third-party testimony to support concern narrative. Suggested language, "We just want what's best." Every word was another nail in the coffin they built for me. Goal, minimize her legal standing while retaining public moral clarity. Consider alternative custody framing that favors consistency over primary parental rights. My father shifted. His attorney leaned in and whispered something. Vera stared forward, her pen frozen over an empty notepad. I didn't gloat. I didn't move. I just let the words fill the room like smoke. They had tried to erase me in a courtroom built to pretend everyone had a voice, but they wrote their plan in ink. And I brought the original script. When recess was called, I stepped out into the hallway, needing air without judgment. I stood by the vending machine, mostly for the hum. Sometimes it helped drown the thoughts. Then I heard her heels. Doreen Mackey, our neighbor. The same woman who'd stood in court last month and said she heard yelling and erratic behavior from my apartment. The same woman who forgot I helped her fix a busted garbage disposal in the middle of February. She hesitated near me, clutching her purse. I was told she began. They said you were unstable, That you might lose it in court. I looked at her. Not hard, not kind, just honest. And? She swallowed. Your father helped us out last spring, paid for the roof repairs when we didn't qualify for the loan. I nodded once. You know what it's like to depend on someone? I said softly, until it stops being help and starts being obedience. She blinked, then looked away. I didn't chase her apology. She wasn't the first to fold, and I was done collecting regret. Back inside, my attorney and I regrouped. The judge's tone had changed, still formal, but now professionally distant from the other side. Like the robe was finally doing what the law was designed to do. Listen. Well, use the letter as grounds to review the timeline of previous testimony, my lawyer said. And that recording Ellis made? We're going to push for it next. I nodded. For the first time since this started, I wasn't just defending myself. I was defining the narrative. I didn't speak to Alton or Vera as I walked past them that afternoon. Their table looked smaller now, their eyes tired. Ellis' drawing folded and tucked inside my bag felt like a declaration now, not a comfort. They didn't expect the letter to speak, but now the silence belongs to them. It was a Friday, but not the kind that promised weekend relief. The courthouse air was sterile, cold, but it carried a kind of weight like a closing argument that had already been written by something greater than law. Every step I took echoed louder than it should have. Every glance felt like a judgment. Ellis' hand was wrapped tightly around mine as we stepped into that courtroom. His fingers were small but certain. In my other hand, tucked into my bag, was the letter, the one they never meant for me to find. The one Ellis had quietly protected, tucked into his sketch folder like a secret too big for his little heart. My lawyer, Mr. Rosenthal, met me at our table. He didn't say much, just a nod. But it was enough. There was nothing left to rehearse. The moment had arrived. The judge asked if we had anything further to submit before final statements. His voice was neutral, procedural, but there was an edge. He already sensed the shift in the air. We do, Rosenthal replied, his tone low but steady. He reached into the folder and produced the letter with careful hands, as though it were something sacred. A letter, Your Honor, and a supplemental audio file for the court's consideration. The judge tilted his head slightly, signaling for the clerk. The other side of the courtroom shifted like a tide breaking. The opposing counsel began flipping papers they hadn't written, hadn't prepared for. Alton, my father, tugged at his collar. Vera, always the composed one, with her faux professional notebook, looked like she might actually need it now. Let's proceed, the judge said, peering over his glasses. The clerk pressed play. It began with static then, scratchy, almost like the silence before a storm. And then my father's voice came through. Clear, calm, calculated. If we win this, he said, she can't touch him again. That's the only way to be sure. The courtroom didn't erupt, but it cracked. You could feel it. A collective breath held, then shattered. It landed like a hammer on tile. I didn't move. I didn't turn around to watch the faces. I kept my eyes on the judge. Then, softer, a second voice, Ellis. Just one line. I don't think Mom's bad. Just that. But sometimes a whisper reveals more truth than 1,000 accusations. The audio cut out. No music, no fade. Just silence, so sharp it rang in your ears. The judge sat back slowly, removing his glasses and folding them in deliberate silence. For a long moment, he said nothing. This court, he finally began, has reviewed the newly submitted evidence. In light of this audio file, the accompanying letter, and the surrounding implications, I find the plaintiff's credibility to be compromised. There it was. Alton didn't move. Vera stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Isolde blinked like the light was suddenly too much. All their certainty, their smug coordination, seemed to flicker. I will not be awarding custody to the petitioners, the judge continued. In fact, I am ordering an immediate investigation into the conduct of this case. This includes a full review for possible witness coercion, document tampering, and psychological manipulation. Each word struck like a gavel on their empire of deception. I felt air return to my lungs, not in a gasp, but in slow, measured increments, like my body didn't fully trust that the fight was over. "My son will remain with me," I whispered. It wasn't for anyone else to hear, just for myself. And this time, I believed it. When I stood, my legs didn't feel shaky. They felt rooted. I left that courtroom the way I came, indignified, upright, but I wasn't the same woman. This time, I wasn't walking into battle. I was walking out with something they thought they could take from me. In the hallway, Isolde passed by without meeting my eyes. Vera muttered something bitter. "You were lucky, I think." I didn't respond. Luck doesn't scan documents. Luck doesn't record audio. And luck didn't hand me that letter. Ellis did. Just outside the courthouse, he ran up to me, his coat flapping open, drawing folder clutched under his arm like it held the world. "Did we win?" he asked. I knelt down, brushing the hair from his forehead, looking into the eyes of the boy who had held onto more than just a drawing. "We told the truth," I said. He nodded like that was all he needed. Maybe for him it was. As we crossed the parking lot, I reached into my pocket and touched the letter again. Folded, worn at the edges. It wasn't written for court, but it carried more weight than all the affidavits and motions combined. That letter didn't appear on any official timeline, but it rewrote everything. They built a story without me. I just tore out the last chapter. Justice gave me space to breathe. Healing, though? That would be the long walk home. One step at a time. But now, at least, I could begin it on my own terms, with Ellis beside me, and no lies left between us. 2 weeks after the ruling, the house was still quiet in the mornings. The difference was, I could hear the quiet now, without wondering what else they might take from me. Ellis sat at the kitchen table, legs swinging beneath the chair, spooning cereal into his mouth like it was just another Tuesday. Because to him, it was. No court today, no suit to iron, no folder to double-check. Just him and me, and the sound of a spoon tapping a ceramic bowl. I didn't bring up the verdict. I didn't bring up the silence from the other side either. No phone call, no message, no dramatic fallout. Except for one thing. Isolde had sent an email. 2 words. "I understand." I never responded. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Later that week, I walked Ellis to school. A neighbor who hadn't so much as looked at me in 6 months gave a soft wave as she trimmed her front hedge. A mom from Ellis' class leaned toward me at pickup and whispered, "You were braver than most of us would have been." I nodded. Not because I believed it, but because I was still trying to figure out what bravery even meant anymore. Alton and Vera still went to church every Sunday, still hosted community luncheons, still smiled in photos with their mouths pressed into a line that only looked like joy if you didn't know them. Pretending like nothing happened was their specialty. But I knew, and they knew I knew. People don't always have to say they're sorry to feel shame. Sometimes silence is their sentence. I hadn't been back to their house, not since all of this started, but I passed it once last week, driving Ellis home from school. The curtains were drawn, the yard too neat. Ellis didn't ask to stop. That night, I dreamed he stood at the edge of their driveway, holding the letter again, the one they never meant for me to see. But in the dream, he didn't hand it to me. He let it go, and the wind carried it away while he walked toward me without a word. I woke up and opened the drawer where I kept his birth certificate. The letter was there too, locked away. Not for revenge, just for remembrance. We didn't talk about court anymore. He didn't ask if Grandpa would ever call. I didn't offer an answer I couldn't stand behind. But healing isn't loud. It's not clean. It moves like water, quiet and unshaped, until it finds its way through. One evening, Ellis came to me with a folded paper in his hands. His cheeks were pink from the cold, his fingers slightly smudged with marker ink. He unfolded the drawing slowly. A house. A sun. 2 stick figures holding hands. Underneath, in his uneven print, "Home is not where people say it is. It's where someone waits for you." I didn't ask who told him that. I didn't ask if it came from a teacher or a book or just his own heart. I just pulled him close and whispered into his hair, "He'll always wait for you." Some promises are too big for courtrooms. This morning, I walked to work my new part-time job at the local community office. It's nothing fancy, filing, phones. But the chair's stable, and no one looks at me like I need to explain the past. I stopped by the corner grocery on the way home, grabbed a bag of fruit, and paused on the sidewalk as the wind picked up. The sky was bruised with winter, but I breathed easier than I had in a long time. They tried to take my name off the record, but my son made sure I was never forgotten. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end when someone chooses peace over silence. In the end, this wasn't just about custody. It wasn't even about courtrooms or legal strategy. It was about being seen, being heard, and refusing to let anyone, no matter how close, rewrite your worth. If you're a parent, a daughter, a survivor of a quiet war like mine, I want you to remember this. Silence can be strength, but only if you use it wisely. You don't have to scream to reclaim your name. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand your ground with truth in your hands and love in your voice. I wasn't erased. I was rewritten by my own resilience and by the child who never stopped calling me Mom. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by the very people who should have supported you? How did you find your way back to yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Read every single one. And hey, if this video touched you, helped you feel seen, or made you think of someone you love, leave a comment with the number 1, or tell me what city or state you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with the story, let me know why. This space is for honest conversation, not just agreement. If you want more stories like this, real, raw, and deeply human, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Because healing doesn't happen in silence. It happens in stories. Let's keep telling them, together. Hello, my name is Sarah. My sister sent me a perfume for my birthday. No card, no warmth, just 2 words. It smelled expensive, but something about it never felt like a gift, so I gave it to her husband. Days later, that same scent nearly ruined his career and unraveled everything she spent years hiding. A hidden trust, a forged signature, a second bottle she never meant for me to see. What kind of sister gifts you something designed to erase you from the family? And what would have happened if I had kept it? Would I still be here to tell you this? It was quiet that morning, too quiet, the kind that settles over a place and makes every little sound feel louder than it should. The mail slot clanked sharply against the wood, and I flinched, though I knew it was nothing more than the usual delivery. Outside, the wind rustled the trees behind the cottage, and the faint scent of chimney smoke drifted through the open kitchen window. Autumn had always been my season, with its silence and small certainties. I made a cup of chamomile tea, the same way I always did. 1 spoon of honey, a twist of lemon. The mug warmed my palms as I stepped onto the back porch, wrapping my shawl tighter around my shoulders. The air had that crisp bite only October in Asheville could offer. Cool, but not bitter, like it hadn't made up its mind whether to comfort or warn. At the bottom of the steps, a small brown parcel rested beside my mailbox. No note, no bright ribbons or celebratory stickers, just a sharp, clean fold and a shipping label. I crouched, picked it up, and walked back inside. The box wasn't heavy, just enough weight to suggest something intentional. I set it down on the kitchen table, peeled back the tape, and lifted the lid. Perfume. A tall glass bottle rested in black velvet, its pale amber liquid catching the light. It was the kind of perfume you didn't buy at the local pharmacy. This was boutique, Parisian, the kind people display more than wear. Next to it, nestled in the corner, was a card. Just 2 words. Happy birthday. That was it. No, love Seraphine. No, to my sister. No hint of affection. Just the kind of generic well-wish you'd find in a chain store card bin. It felt like a placeholder someone else had written. I stared at it for longer than I should have. My tea had gone lukewarm. I reached for it, sipped, and said aloud, though no one was there to hear me, I've received more warmth from strangers than I ever did from Seraphine. That might have been cruel, but it wasn't untrue. I left the box open on the table and walked to the window. The trees were starting to change, the first hints of red and gold whispering through the leaves. A wind chime across the street tinkled softly. It should have felt peaceful. But all I could think about was how this was the first time in years my sister had remembered my birthday on time, and even then, it felt like a transaction. Later that afternoon, I sat on the couch with the bottle in my hand, turning it over slowly. It was beautiful, no denying that. The kind of thing that belonged in a magazine, or maybe on Seraphine's bathroom vanity. Not on mine, not in this tiny rented cottage filled with secondhand furniture and dog-eared library books. It smelled expensive. Floral, but not sweet. A little sharp, like citrus rinds and old money. I set it down and stared at the card again. The more I looked at it, the more I felt like I didn't exist. That night, I pulled out an old memory. Aurelian, my brother-in-law, had once fixed my flat tire in the middle of a downpour when Seraphine told me she couldn't possibly miss her hair appointment. He didn't make a big show of it, didn't make me feel like an inconvenience. Just showed up with a toolbox and a quiet kind of kindness that stayed with me. He was always like that, not soft exactly, but solid, reliable. The next morning, I wrapped the perfume in tissue paper and placed it in a small gift bag I'd saved from a book fair. It was bright red and had tiny owls on it, ridiculous next to something so elegant, but I didn't care. That evening, I showed up to the family dinner Seraphine had planned. Her house, of course. She always hosted, always controlled the lighting, the music, the wine. She greeted me at the door with a tight smile and a champagne flute already in her hand. "Glad you made it," she said, then turned before I could respond. Dinner was polite, as always. Conversations that skimmed over politics, avoided anything personal. Aurelian was the only one who asked how work was going, and when I told him the city had finally approved the new bookmobile budget, he smiled like it genuinely meant something. After we finished dessert, I handed him the bag. "It's just something I think suits you more than me," I said softly. "Too refined for me, really." He opened it slowly, pulled out the perfume, and raised his eyebrows. Wow, this is the nicest gift I've gotten in years." He laughed, genuinely. The sound relaxed the stiffness in my shoulders. "Thank you, Sarah. Really." Seraphine looked at the bottle, then at me. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said, "that was meant for you." There was a pause. I felt it hang between us. "I know," I replied, reaching for my water glass. "But I thought Aurelian might get more use out of it." She didn't argue, just sipped her wine and changed the subject. By the time I left, the sky had deepened into that purple blue that comes just before night. I walked home, not in a hurry. The air was cool and the street quiet. It gave me time to think, to replay her expression when he opened the gift. Not anger, something else. Unease, like she hadn't expected it to change hands. Back home, I slipped off my shoes and sat on the porch swing with a blanket wrapped around my legs. The birthday card lay on the side table. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand again. 2 words. That was all. A chill moved through me, not from the wind. And for the first time, a question took root in my mind. What if that perfume wasn't meant for me at all? 2 days passed, and that question never left my mind. It stayed with me as I stacked library books back into place, whispered through the rustling pages of overdue novels, and hung in the air between dinner and silence. Even when I tried to talk myself out of it, convincing myself I was being overly sensitive, maybe even petty, it was still there, curled in the corner of my thoughts like smoke from a fire that hadn't gone out. So when my father asked me to return his book to Seraphine, the one I'd lent him weeks ago, I offered to drop it off without hesitation. Part of me just wanted to get it over with. But the deeper part, the part I tried to ignore, wanted to see her again, to look her in the eye and see if something in her expression would confirm what I already feared. By the time I reached their place, the sun had started slipping behind the trees, casting that soft, late afternoon glow across their porch. Her house stood there like a magazine spread, neat, polished, no weeds in the yard. Everything in its place, Seraphine always said homes should speak for you before you speak for yourself. Mine probably whispered that I drank too much tea and didn't dust enough. I knocked once. No answer. And then the front door creaked open. "Come in," she called from somewhere inside. I stepped in, clutching the worn novel in my hand. The smell of rosemary and lemon filled the entryway, probably from one of her signature diffuser blends. The house looked immaculate, of course. Table set, candles arranged just so. Seraphine's voice floated from the kitchen, light and full of charm. I followed the sound until I caught sight of her standing at the counter, laughing. Dressed in cream slacks and a silk blouse, her makeup flawless even at 5 o'clock. Aurelian stood beside her, sleeves rolled up, holding a cutting board. "Hey, Sarah," he said warmly, smiling when he saw me. "Didn't expect you till later." I nodded, raising the book. "Just dropping this off for Dad." Seraphine turned, eyes bright, smile still intact. But something shifted, only for a second, when Aurelian leaned toward her. I saw him pause and smile, then reach over and tap the side of his neck. "You notice anything different?" he asked playfully. Before she could answer, he stepped back with a flourish. "I'm wearing that cologne, the one Sarah gave me." The room froze, not completely, just enough. Seraphine's smile tightened. Barely. Her fingers, which had been hovering over the wine glasses, lowered an inch. It was a pause so small, someone less familiar with her might have missed it. But I didn't. "You're wearing that?" she asked, her voice just a little too sharp. Then, as if realizing how it sounded, she added quickly, "I mean, now?" Aurelian chuckled. "Yeah, thought I'd try it. Smells expensive." He shot me a wink. "You sure you didn't want to keep it?" I smiled. "Positive." Seraphine didn't say anything else. She turned back to arranging appetizers with too much focus. I stood there a moment longer, trying to ignore the feeling creeping up my spine, that slight shift in her face. I'd seen it before. When I was 12, Mom's heirloom necklace went missing. Days later, Seraphine claimed she found it under my bed, but I remembered the panic in her eyes when Dad first noticed it was gone, the way she couldn't meet my gaze until she had a way out. That same look was in her eyes now, polished panic. A few minutes later, Aurelian walked me to the foyer. "Thanks again for the gift," he said. "I'm not exactly a fancy cologne guy, but hey, I feel like a senator wearing it." I chuckled softly. "You pull it off better than I ever could." He hesitated. "Seraphine didn't say anything weird about it, did she?" I shook my head. "Not directly." He furrowed his brow but didn't push. I appreciated that about him. He always knew when to leave a thought alone. We said goodbye, and I stepped out onto the porch just as the sky turned that soft, smoky pink that always made Asheville feel like a painting. Instead of going home, I took a detour through the neighborhood, letting my legs walk me through memories I didn't ask for. I remembered the garage sale when I was 16. I'd spent the better part of a year sketching in a notebook, a mix of terrible poetry and even worse drawings, but it was mine. Seraphine had offered to help me declutter, which back then sounded like kindness. Weeks later, I found that notebook on someone's front table, priced at 50 cents. When I'd confronted her, she laughed, said she thought I didn't want it anymore, that I'd grown out of it. Said it with that same tone she used when she messed up but never admitted it. That tone clung to my memory like fog. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. Just stood in the kitchen and let the quiet wrap around me. I set the book down, boiled some water, and waited for the kettle to sing. I didn't want to believe anything sinister, but the feeling wouldn't leave me alone. That perfume, her reaction, something didn't add up. I had no proof, only instinct, but sometimes instinct is louder than facts. 2 days later, I returned to their house. Seraphine was hosting a dinner for one of Aurelian's clients. A small group, just 4 people. I offered to help set the table because I needed to be near her. Not to accuse, to watch. She gave me the linen napkins, and I folded each one slowly, making sure my hands didn't tremble. Seraphine moved gracefully around the room, but her eyes kept darting to me, like she expected me to break something. She paused at the edge of the dining table, adjusted a flower arrangement, then said without turning, "Some gifts aren't meant to be passed on, Sarah." The words weren't loud. But they sliced. I kept folding napkins. And some gifts, I said calmly, aren't meant to be given. She turned to look at me then, really looked. There wasn't anger in her eyes, not yet, just that calculating stillness, the same one she used when she wanted something to disappear without getting her hands dirty. We didn't say anything else, but in that moment, we both knew something had changed. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough. By the time I got back to my place, the silence was a little too sharp. I remember walking in, setting my keys down, and letting the question echo again in my head, over and over like a faucet dripping in the middle of the night. Some gifts aren't meant to be given. The next morning, the chill in the air felt different. Like it wasn't just weather anymore, it was warning. I woke up restless, and before I'd even made coffee, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was Aurelian. "Hey, can we talk? Something weird happened today." There was no punctuation, no context, just that. I read the message twice before calling him. He didn't pick up. An hour later, I sat in my car in the parking lot outside his downtown office, watching the front door like I was casing the place. I hated that I felt nervous, but something in his message had knocked the wind out of me. When he finally opened the door and waved me in, I noticed it immediately. He looked tired, not physically, but like someone who was walking around with too many unsaid things. "Thanks for coming," he said, motioning toward the small meeting room next to reception. "I didn't know who else to call." I nodded, followed him inside, and sat across from him. "You okay?" I asked. He exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. "Depends on how you define okay." That's when he told me. He'd worn the cologne to a pitch meeting with a tech client, big account, 2 execs, 1 assistant, all seated around a glossy conference table while he laid out a 12-month contract plan. Halfway through, one of the execs started coughing. Bad. Then wheezing. She reached for her inhaler, but it didn't help. Her face turned blotchy. They had to call paramedics. "The assistant," Aurelian said, leaning forward. Before they left, she pulled me aside and asked what cologne I was wearing. I told her it was a gift. He paused. She looked startled. Then she said something like, "I thought I recognized that scent. It's very specific." I felt my stomach pull tight. He looked at me. "Sarah, I think that perfume might have been a bad idea." I opened my mouth to speak, then closed it. A million thoughts rushed through at once. "I'm so sorry," I said finally, my voice quieter than I meant. "I thought—" "No," he interrupted gently. "No. You meant well, I know that. It's just the timing, the reaction, and the assistant recognizing it. Something's off." I didn't say anything right away. Just sat there, my fingers gripping the edge of the table, the words crawling up the back of my throat. What if it wasn't just a coincidence? What if it wasn't really meant for me? I left shortly after. He had to get back to work, and I needed air. The drive home was a blur. Red lights, pedestrians, the faint music of Asheville playing on porches and cafes, but none of it sank in. When I walked into my kitchen, I didn't even take off my coat. I went straight to the drawer where I kept my journal, flipped to a clean page, and wrote one line. Perfume. Where did she buy it? I sat with that question for a while, just stared at it, as if the ink might rearrange itself into an answer. Then something clicked. The shipping label. I remembered it from the box. It hadn't looked like anything I'd seen before. No recognizable branding, no boutique name, just a clean white label with a barcode and a P.O. box. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. I searched online, typing in fragments of the barcode and phrases like discreet perfume shipping. Nothing helpful, but I still had the bottle. I grabbed it from the bedroom shelf, still as beautiful and cold as the day it arrived, and turned it over, looking for anything that might help. There, tiny print near the base, a serial number. I dialed the customer service line listed on the brand's website, and after a short wait, a polite woman picked up. "Thank you for calling Norio Fragrance. How can I assist you today?" I gave her the serial number and explained I'd received it as a gift, just wanted to know where it came from. There was a pause. "Ma'am," she said slowly, "I'm sorry, but this bottle was purchased under a private account. Okay, is there any information you can share? Maybe the purchase date? Another pause. Then she replied, "It was purchased about 6 months ago. March." I blinked. My mouth went dry. 6 months ago. 6 months ago, Seraphine was in Lisbon. That's what she told everyone. A European press tour for one of her clients. She'd posted photos of rooftops and wine glasses, handwritten captions about recharging creative energy. I remember because I'd commented on one of them. She never replied. But if she'd been out of the country, why would she be buying a local bottle of perfume? And why ship it from a P.O. box 20 minutes from her house? Something wasn't adding up. After I hung up, I sat on the couch, the perfume bottle resting in my palm. It felt heavier now. What if she never meant to give it to me? What if it had been repackaged, reassigned? What if it wasn't really a gift at all? I stayed there for a long time. The room slowly dimmed as the sun dipped below the trees. I didn't turn on a light, just let the dark come in naturally, the way it always did. And in that quiet space, with the bottle on my knee and the past echoing louder than ever, something finally clicked into place. This wasn't about birthdays. It wasn't about generosity. It was about intent. It was a Thursday evening, just cool enough to need a jacket. The kind of air that hinted fall was serious now, no more pretending summer might return. The sky held that soft blue haze that comes just before sunset, and I remember adjusting the sleeves of my cardigan while I stood on Seraphine's porch, mentally bracing for whatever version of her I was about to walk into. 2 days had passed since I'd spoken to the perfume company. 2 days since I learned that the bottle Seraphine gave me had been purchased locally. At the same time, she was supposedly off in Portugal, sipping wine and hashtagging rooftops. I hadn't confronted her. Not yet. Something told me not to play that card until I was ready. But I knew one thing for certain. That perfume was never meant to be a gift. I rang the doorbell. Inside, the house buzzed with voices, the clinking of silverware, and the unmistakable laughter Seraphine reserved for company, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. She opened the door herself, wearing a silk blouse the color of bone and a necklace that sparkled too perfectly. Her smile was immediate, polished. "Right on time," she said, stepping aside. Thaddeus, our father, was already seated at the head of the dining table. His posture was stiff, hands folded in front of him like he was waiting for an apology that hadn't yet arrived. I stepped inside slowly, nodding at him, and offered a polite smile to the others, a couple of Seraphine's acquaintances I didn't know by name, and a woman from the non-profit board she'd recently joined. But something was off. The air felt taut, controlled, like everyone knew this dinner wasn't about roast chicken and roasted root vegetables. I sat across from Thaddeus, and as the last guest settled in, Seraphine lifted her glass of wine. "Before we start," she said, her voice syrupy smooth, "I think it's time we talk about what happened to Aurelian." The room went still. She looked at me, not harshly, not with open accusation, but with that tone, the one she used when she wanted you to feel like you'd disappointed everyone, even God. "I've been thinking," she continued, "about the gift Sarah gave him, the perfume. And while I know it was meant kindly, maybe it just wasn't thought through." There it was. I didn't say a word, just placed my hands in my lap and listened. Thaddeus cleared his throat. "Sarah," he said, like he was starting a lecture, "you should have asked if that gift was even appropriate. Some scents can be quite triggering for people, and it wasn't yours to experiment with." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. That was the thing about my family. We never had to yell to draw blood. I looked down at my napkin, folded perfectly, starched within an inch of its life. "I had no idea," I said, quietly. "It was meant as a gesture." Seraphine tilted her head. A gesture that ended in someone being rushed out of a meeting on oxygen. She made it sound like I'd sent anthrax in a gift bag. The other guests said nothing, just shifted awkwardly, stared at their wine glasses. It wasn't the first time I'd been framed as the problem. When I was 7, Seraphine knocked over Mom's violin, her prized possession from college, and the neck snapped clean off. She'd cried, full-blown tears, said she saw me playing with the case earlier that day. I hadn't touched it. But I was quiet, and she was dramatic, and Mom couldn't imagine her golden girl lying. So the blame fell on me. It always did. Broken windows, burnt cookies, a neighbor's missing cat that turned up in our garage. Somehow, even when I hadn't been there, the narrative found a way to put the weight on my shoulders. The difference now, I saw it, and I wasn't a child anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't raise my voice or try to win the room. Instead, I let it happen. Let her paint me as impulsive, careless, irresponsible. Let Thaddeus frown in that way he always did when he thought I was too soft, too slow, too sentimental. But I took notes. In my mind, I made a list of everything said, who said it, who stayed silent. Aurelian arrived late. He walked in carrying a bottle of wine and paused the moment he stepped into the dining room. You could feel it. He sensed the tension before anyone said a word. He greeted everyone, gave Seraphine a quick kiss on the cheek, then sat down beside me. "I hope I didn't miss much," he said lightly. I saw the way his gaze flicked around the room. He was piecing it together. He looked at me. "You all right?" I nodded once, then turned back to my plate. Dessert was served, some kind of berry tart with a mint leaf placed just so, and the conversation drifted back to nonprofits and holiday planning. It wasn't until the table began to clear that Seraphine made her move. She leaned in, just enough so no one else could hear. Her voice low, precise. "Next time, keep your gifts to yourself." I turned toward her, slowly. She didn't blink. I smiled, just slightly, and replied, "Next time, keep your lies better hidden." Her pupils narrowed, jaw tightening just enough to confirm I'd struck something deeper than pride. She turned away before she could lose control of her expression. I stood, excused myself, and stepped outside into the night. The air had cooled even more. Leaves crunched under my shoes as I walked back to the car. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious either. What I felt was clarity. If this was the game she wanted to play, then I'd play it better. Because now, I wasn't just guessing. Now, I had questions worth answering. The sun hadn't even cleared the edge of the trees when I opened my eyes the next morning. I'd slept, technically, but not the kind that makes you feel rested. More like my body shut down just long enough to keep the lights on. I sat up slowly, pulled on my robe, and padded into the kitchen. The air was still. The kind of stillness that doesn't feel peaceful, just expectant. Coffee wasn't strong enough that day. I skipped it entirely and went for a notepad and pen instead. Sitting at the small table by the window, I drew a line down the center of the page like I had so many times before, habit learned from my librarian years. One column read, "What I know." The other, "What I can prove." The list on the left grew quickly. Seraphine told everyone she was in Portugal 6 months ago. The perfume was bought locally during that time. She used a private account for the purchase. The card said "Happy Birthday" with no name, no warmth. Her reaction when Aurelian wore the scent. The right column, though, was thinner. Bottle with serial number. Confirmation from the perfume company on date and purchase type. That imbalance between knowing and proving, that's what kept me up at night. I pushed the notebook aside and reached for the black velvet box still sitting on my bookshelf. I hadn't opened it again since the day it arrived, but something told me I missed something. This time, I pulled the entire interior padding out, not just the top layer. Folded underneath was a narrow slip of paper, not a receipt, a label. Norio Asheville, Biltmore Boutique, downtown. Less than 20 minutes from where Seraphine lived. I stared at the label and exhaled slowly. You slipped up, Seraphine. After a quick shower and a light breakfast I barely tasted, I drove into town. The boutique was nestled between a French bakery and an interior design studio, exactly the kind of place Seraphine would spend her Saturdays. The inside smelled like orange blossom and sandalwood, subtle and expensive. The clerk, probably no older than 22, stood behind the counter with a soft smile and glossy hair. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone practiced but not unkind. "I hope so," I replied. "I was given a bottle of perfume recently. Norio Vert Blanche. I loved it. Thought I might want to order another one." Of course, she said. Do you have the bottle or a serial code? I handed her a photo I'd taken of the bottom of the bottle that morning. She typed the number into the system. There was a pause, then her brow lifted slightly. That bottle was purchased 6 months ago, she said. It was a custom wrap. My pulse kicked up a notch. Do you happen to know how it was delivered? She glanced back at her screen. It was a walk-in. Paid in full, wrapped here, picked up same day. Could you tell me who bought it? I'm afraid I can't give out personal information, she replied gently, but I can confirm the initials on the account were SD. Seraphine Dalton. That was all I needed. I thanked her, left the boutique, and sat in my car for several minutes before turning the ignition. Half of me wanted to scream. The other half just wanted to sit there and breathe through the fury slowly gathering behind my ribs. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the autumn light had shifted. It was early afternoon now, the sun filtering through the trees in slanted lines. I went inside, pulled the journal back toward me, and added a new page. Entry, perfume timeline, purchase date, March 12th, boutique location, Asheville, in person, claimed trip to Portugal, March 3rd, 24th, boutique confirms initials, SD, conclusion, she bought the perfume while lying about her location. I sat back in the chair and stared out the window. A neighbor's dog barked. A few leaves drifted from the old oak out front. I thought of all the times I'd been told I was overreacting. Or worse, being dramatic. This wasn't drama. This was evidence. I remembered something my mother used to say when we were kids. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand still long enough. Seraphine had always been the one with the loudest voice in the room, but I'd learned how to write things down, how to wait, how to let the facts do the talking. Gifts from guilt often cost more than money, I said aloud, pen tapping against the paper. I flipped to a new page. At the top, I wrote in bold letters, Phase 2, watch, listen, wait. Just as I underlined it, a knock came at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I stood slowly, walked to the window, and peeked out. It was Aurelian. Alone. He wasn't smiling. I opened the door. We need to talk, he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. Alone. I stepped back and held the door open wider. Aurelian didn't speak right away. His face was tight, like someone holding his breath at a funeral. He walked in slowly, and I shut the door behind him. He didn't sit, just stood in the middle of the room, hands on his hips, eyes darting around like he didn't know where to land. She's been lying to me, he said finally, voice flat. Or maybe that's not even news to you anymore. I crossed my arms and stayed quiet. Let him find his pace. There's something I think you should know, he continued, running a hand through his hair. I didn't want to bring it up at dinner, but I remembered something after that whole mess. Weeks ago, maybe longer, I saw a bottle that looked exactly like the perfume you gave me. In her closet. Back corner. I just assumed it was hers, or maybe something she meant to re-gift. But after everything, he trailed off. It's still there? I asked. He nodded. I didn't touch it. I didn't even think about it again until you said what you did at the table. I motioned to the couch. You want a drink? No, he said. I'm heading back home in a few. But I'll text you a picture when I get there. We stood in silence for a few beats. Then he added, If she really did something, Sarah, I hope you don't just sit on it. I know you think too long sometimes. That stung more than I let on. After he left, I didn't move for a while. I just stood in the kitchen, staring out the window into the dark, thinking about how many times Seraphine had hidden things in plain sight, things she knew I wouldn't question. An hour later, a message lit up my phone. Aurelian. Just took this. The same bottle, same ribbon. But the liquid inside looks lighter. Not sure if that means anything. Attached was a photo, and there it was. The bottle, the exact same one. Except the fluid inside was faintly pink, not the pale amber of mine. My hands went cold. She didn't give me something she bought for me. She gave me something she didn't dare keep. The next morning, I made an appointment at Carson Webb, The firm our family had used for everything from mortgages to medical directives since I was a kid. I called under the guise of needing to review my own estate plan, just a routine check-in. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, her earrings shaped like tiny ginkgo leaves. She offered me coffee while I waited, and I sat down in the same chair I'd used when my mother signed her last will. It had been 10 years. The chair hadn't changed. When they called me in, I was led to a room with a wall of leather-bound folders and a smell like paper and lemon oil. Ms. Hartridge, a junior partner, shook my hand and asked me what I needed. We walked through the basics of my modest estate, my house, savings, a few old family items, and then I leaned forward slightly. "While I'm here," I said casually, "I was wondering if I could get a look at my parents' trust structure. Just peace of mind. My sister mentioned she had updated something, and I want to make sure I understand what's changed." The assistant beside her clicked through a system and blinked. "Oh, yes. The Dalton Trust was revised about 5 months ago." "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to sound surprised, not furious. "Yes, Seraphine submitted the paperwork. It went through in April. Didn't she tell you?" I shook my head slowly. "No. I wasn't aware of any revisions." The assistant glanced nervously at Miss Hartridge. "Do you want me to pull the file?" "Please," I said. 10 minutes later, I was sitting at the long conference table with a manila folder open in front of me. Inside were copies of the updated trust documents. My name was no longer listed as a beneficiary. It wasn't just that she'd taken me out, it was that she'd done it using a scanned signature from our mother. The signature was dated, backdated actually, to a time that made it seem like Mom had signed it shortly before her final illness. My stomach turned. There are levels of betrayal in every family. You expect small ones, resentments, petty slights, forgotten birthdays. But this was an excavation, a conscious effort to dig me out of the foundation like I'd never been part of it. I didn't say a word as I closed the file, handed it back, and thanked them for their time. On the drive home, the sky was turning a soft gray, and the first drops of rain pattered on the windshield as I pulled into my driveway. Inside, I laid the copy I'd requested, the only piece of evidence I could take with me, on the kitchen table. Then I placed the perfume bottle beside it. The ribbon on the cap had started to fray. I opened my journal again, wrote at the top of a new page, "Truth they hoped I'd never find." Beneath that, I listed, "Duplicate perfume bottle found, visual difference in liquid, boutique confirms Seraphine bought locally. Trust revision filed using falsified signature. My name removed from inheritance." I stared at the list, then reached for a red pen and circled the last line. I didn't feel like crying. I didn't feel like yelling. I felt like moving, like momentum had finally caught up with me. She thought this was about a bottle, but it never was. I whispered, almost without meaning to, "You're about to learn it never was." I didn't rush my steps. From the street to Seraphine's front door, I walked like someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to show. The family dinner she invited us to came wrapped in a well-worded email. She called it a chance to reset, to clear the air after a few recent misunderstandings. She CC'd everyone, Dad, Aurelian, even 2 of our cousins who hadn't been involved in anything but were always good at nodding and staying neutral. It was classic Seraphine, control the room before the room gets a chance to speak. But this time, I had something she didn't count on. Truth, proof, and the nerve to put it all on the table, literally. I arrived 5 minutes early, gift bag in hand. Nothing fancy, just a plain navy blue tote with reinforced handles, the kind you'd get at a bookstore. It held 3 things: the perfume bottle, a copy of the trust revision, and the boutique receipt with her name printed in bold, unmistakable ink. Seraphine opened the door herself, smiling like I hadn't ever confronted her. "Sarah," she said smoothly, "so glad you could come." I stepped inside without responding. Her foyer smelled like lavender and pine, comforting to anyone who didn't know her long enough to be suspicious of anything that smelled too perfect. Aurelian was already there, seated near the fireplace, fiddling with his phone. He looked up when he saw me and nodded once. I couldn't read the expression on his face yet. Dad was in his usual chair at the head of the table, shoulders squared, mouth tight. His suit jacket hung on the back of the chair, always prepared to appear official, even in personal affairs. The cousins were whispering in the hallway, probably wondering what this dinner was actually about. We all gathered at the dining table, the same one from earlier weeks, the table where I first saw Seraphine flinch when Aurelian wore the perfume, the table where she tilted blame like a waiter pouring wine. She sat at the other end this time, opposite Dad, trying to look balanced, moderate, calm. Dinner started with salad and safe conversation, someone's retirement, the local school board, a new yoga class. But I could feel it building. That slow pressure behind the eyes. The air got heavier with every passing minute, every clink of silverware against porcelain. Halfway through the entree, I cleared my throat gently and reached for the gift bag resting by my feet. "There's something I want to return," I said, not loud, but clear. Heads turned. Seraphine froze, her fork suspended midair. I pulled out the perfume bottle first. Set it down in the center of the table. "The gift you gave me. Or rather, the one you repackaged." Aurelian's eyes narrowed. Dad shifted in his seat. Next, I removed the envelope with the trust documents, laid it beside the bottle. This one wasn't as pretty, but it still came with your name on it. I slid the third item out, my printed copy of the boutique receipt. Bold black text, no room for denial. I turned it towards Seraphine, but didn't push it forward. Let her decide whether to look. I wanted to believe the perfume was careless, that it was just your usual brand of thoughtless. But then I learned it was bought here, in town, while you were supposedly overseas. No one spoke. I looked to Dad. And this document here, this trust revision? My name was removed, signed with a scanned version of Mom's signature, backdated. She'd already passed when this was filed. His face was blank, not shocked, not defensive, just blank. Seraphine sat very still, her back straight, eyes pinned to the documents like they were ticking. Finally, she spoke. "You twisted this," she said, her voice rising just enough to rattle the plates. "You're trying to make me look like the villain here." I didn't move. "You gave me a bottle filled with silence," I said evenly, "and thought I'd drink it." She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. Her hands were shaking, just barely. Dad opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off. "She was never meant to have anything anyway." There it was. The words exploded in the room like a firecracker in a church. Aurelian stood slowly, his napkin falling to the floor. He looked at her like he didn't know who he'd married. The cousins were wide-eyed, lips pressed tight. Dad leaned back, hands resting on the table, eyes drifting between me and the stack of truth I had just placed in front of them all. I gathered the documents, the bottle, and tucked them neatly back into the bag. "This was never about a gift," I said, voice steady. "It was about who gets to matter." And with that, I pushed back my chair and walked toward the door. Nobody stopped me. I didn't sleep the night after the dinner. Not because of rage, not even pain. It was something quieter than that, an emptiness that came after everything inside you had already burned out. I sat on my porch swing with a blanket over my lap, the sky shifting from deep navy to gray, and listened to the world wake up without needing me to respond. I didn't expect anyone to call. But at 6:42 a.m., my phone buzzed. Aurelian. "I left. Can I call you later?" I didn't answer immediately. I stared at the message for several minutes, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally had the power to decide if I wanted to say anything at all. Instead of texting back, I stood, went inside, made tea, and waited for the next domino to fall. It didn't take long. By mid-morning, my voicemail was full. Seraphine called 5 times in the span of an hour. The first message was snippy, coded in that high-pitched veneer she always used when she wanted to sound composed, but was cracking. "You humiliated me. That was a private family matter and you..." Delete. The second message tried to take a softer tone. "I know we've had our issues, but airing them like that? Sarah, come on, this isn't who you are?" Actually, I thought, this is exactly who I've always been. You just never listened. The next 3 messages teetered between rage and desperation. One even ended with her breaking down into tears, gasping out that people were asking questions and she couldn't fix it all. That part? That wasn't my responsibility. At noon, the call came from the family's attorney, a man I hadn't spoken to in years, not since Mom's will was read in that same oak-paneled room where Seraphine played the role of oldest daughter like it was a pageant. "Miss Dalton," he said with practiced neutrality, "we were reviewing your family trust. I was unaware your name had been removed. That shouldn't have happened without your consent." I let that silence sit. "It's being reinstated," he added. "Your father has requested it personally." I don't know what struck me harder, that Seraphine had gone behind Dad's back or that Dad had actually taken a step toward correcting it. "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice even. "He also asked if you might be willing to speak with him." I hesitated. "When?" "He said you'd know when you're ready." I wasn't, not yet, but I knew I would be. 2 days passed. Enough time for the buzz around the dinner confrontation to spread. Small-town buzz is different. It's subtle, like the way neighbors water their lawns a little longer when you're outside, hoping you'll offer a sliver of gossip. And then came the video. I don't know who told Seraphine it was a good idea, but there she was on social media, teary-eyed, voice trembling just enough, talking into the front-facing camera like she was the victim of an internal war none of us could understand. "I made mistakes," she said, wiping at eyes that didn't look red. "But I was trying to protect what mattered. Sometimes we make choices we can't undo, and people don't know the full story." Cue the piano music, the filtered lighting. Within hours, it blew up. Not in the way she hoped. Comments flooded in, screenshots of her previous posts claiming she was in Portugal during the perfume purchase, questions about the trust documents, speculation about her finances. People didn't want perfection anymore. They wanted transparency. And Seraphine had built an entire brand on airbrushed lies. By the end of the week, 2 of her brand sponsorships had pulled out. Her name trended locally, then regionally. And Aurelian. He filed for legal separation and moved into a rental apartment on the other side of town. He didn't tell me at first. I found out through one of the cousins who forwarded me a listing and said, "Recognize the couch?" It was the same one Seraphine swore was too tacky for the living room, the one Aurelian had picked out with care, then stored in the garage for months. I met Dad on a Sunday afternoon. He'd asked me to stop by if I had time. I almost didn't go, but something told me I needed to close that loop. He was in the study, sitting in the chair where he used to do taxes, read newspapers, and pretend not to play favorites. "Sarah," he said, standing halfway before deciding against it. I nodded politely. "I didn't know she filed those changes," he said. "I assumed it was all in order. Your mother—" He stopped. "She wanted everything split equally." I believed that. He looked at me then, not like the little girl who spilled juice on the carpet, but like someone who might have been worth listening to all along. "We were wrong about you," he said quietly. "I was wrong. I didn't cry. I nodded once. That was all I needed. But it wasn't all I wanted. I left without saying more. Some things don't require an encore." 2 days later, I walked into the lawyer's office and signed the reinstatement papers. No celebration, no handshakes, just a clean signature and the shake in my fingers I couldn't quite steady. The assistant tried to make small talk. I gave her a small smile. She slid the final folder across the table. "This secures your portion," she said. I nodded. It was never about money. I stood, tucked the pen back into my purse, and glanced at the door. It was about finally being seen. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains in my living room, laying quiet golden stripes across the rug. For once, it wasn't trying to wake me up or chase shadows off the walls. It just was. I sat in my favorite chair by the window, the one with the flattened cushion and tea rings on the armrest, holding a mug that had gone cold long before I even noticed. The house was still, not in the heavy, oppressive way it used to be, but in that unfamiliar peace that comes after a storm has finally passed. Not everything was repaired, not every piece of debris cleared, but it was quiet. I glanced at the navy blue bag still sitting in the corner of the room. It hadn't moved since the night I placed it there, after the confrontation. Inside were the perfume bottle, the copies of the trust papers, and my notebook, worn soft from flipping its pages so many times. Funny how something that had once felt like a bomb now looked more like a forgotten library return. I sipped what was left of my tea and set the mug down gently on the table. The air had changed in the last week, not just inside the house, but inside me. I walked into my bedroom and pulled open the bottom drawer of the old cedar chest I'd kept at the foot of my bed for years. It was my mother's, the kind of trunk that smelled of wood oil, time, and a life I could only touch through scent and memory now. Beneath the folded quilts and a stack of letters tied in blue ribbon was a delicate handkerchief. Inside it, wrapped with care, was a small, squat glass vial with no label. The moment I unwrapped it, the scent drifted up, jasmine and old books, the faintest trace of honey and cloves. My mother's perfume. Not something expensive, not meant for showing off. It was the kind of scent that lingered after a good hug, after bedtime stories, after words like, "I'm proud of you," whispered when the world wasn't watching. As I held the vial, a memory floated to the surface, me as a child, sitting in front of her vanity, watching her brush her hair. She looked at me in the mirror and said, "You matter more than you'll ever be told. Don't ever forget it, even when people try to." And hadn't they tried? They tried with silence, with omission, with beautiful lies wrapped in velvet. But I hadn't forgotten. I tucked the handkerchief and the vial into my dresser drawer, not out of sight, but closer. Something worth keeping. That afternoon, while washing a few dishes in the sink, my eyes landed on a cream-colored envelope on the kitchen counter. I knew who it was from, even before I picked it up. Seraphine's handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, flawless, like it had been trained in a convent. No return address. No note on the outside. I didn't open it. Instead, I slid it between the last pages of my notebook. Some apologies aren't written to heal. They're written to shift the weight of guilt off the sender's chest and onto yours. I'd carried enough of that. Let her keep hers. The following day, I made one last appointment at the estate office. The lawyer looked at me with practiced politeness as I walked in. We signed the final amendment that restored my place in the trust. No mention of lawsuits, no whisper of what had been removed or replaced. "You do realize," he said gently, sliding the papers toward me, "you could still challenge the previous forgery. It would hold." I shook my head. Let her rebuild herself. I'm not carrying this anymore. I didn't want to be the reason she lost everything. That was the difference between us. She tried to erase me. I just stepped out of her shadow. On my way home, I stopped by a women's shelter thrift store in West Asheville. I handed the perfume bottle, still in its box, to the young woman behind the desk. "No name," I said, when she asked if I wanted to leave contact info. "It's beautiful," she said, opening the lid. "Expensive, too." "Maybe someone will appreciate it," I replied. "Or maybe they'll just like the smell." I didn't need it anymore. That afternoon, I walked into downtown for coffee with Leora. The air was crisp, the trees loud with color, fiery reds, deep oranges, yellow just starting to turn. Asheville had never looked more like a painting. We sat by the cafe window in silence, not because we had nothing to say, but because the quiet finally felt earned. A small boy passed the window holding his mother's hand, and for a split second, he turned, looked directly at me, and smiled wide. I smiled back. My hand rested over my heart, where that old scent still lingered, light as a whisper, permanent as a promise. She gave me a perfume that was meant to erase me. But I chose one that reminds me who I've always been. Sometimes, the most painful betrayals don't come from strangers. They come gift-wrapped from the people who claim to love you most. This story isn't just about perfume or even inheritance. It's about choosing dignity when silence is no longer survival. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect your peace? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more true-to-life family stories that cut deep and stay with you long after the video ends.
Hi, I'm Rayanne. My sister said I wasn't valuable enough to deserve a seat at the gala.
But what hurt more wasn't her words. It was how easily the people I trusted turned their backs. They erased my name, whispered lies behind champagne glasses, and watched me stand there alone. I thought I knew betrayal. But what do you do when the ones you call family are the first to cut you down? Stay with me. Because this story isn't just about loss. It's about what happens when you finally choose yourself. The air inside the Fairmont Boston Hotel's ballroom was thick with roses and expensive perfume. Crystal chandeliers threw cold light across the marble floors. I clutched my invitation tighter, steadying my breath. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a family affair. I had chosen my navy dress carefully, one that said I belonged. I didn't realize how wrong I was. As I stepped inside, the buzz of conversation dipped. Eyes flickered toward me, then away. My heels clicked too loudly against the floor. I scanned the tables, searching for my name among the neat rows of white place cards. None read Rayanne. I approached a server. "Excuse me, could you help me find my table?" He hesitated, glancing toward the head table where Jolene, my sister, sat like royalty. Her champagne glass caught the light as she spotted me. A slow, cutting smile spread across her face. She stood, raising her glass high. "Rayanne, you made it," she called, her voice clear and sharp. "I wasn't sure you would since, seating's reserved for our contributors tonight." The word hit like a slap. Laughter rippled through the room, polite, poisonous. I forced a tight smile, my fingers digging into my clutch. "Of course, I wouldn't miss it." Jolene tilted her head, her blonde curls gleaming. "I'm sure you understand, sweetie. We have appearances to keep up." The humiliation burned through me. I turned away slowly, keeping my head high, refusing to let her see me falter. Near the bar, whispers floated around me. "Isn't she the one still living off Jolene's family? I heard she hasn't had a real job in years. Total leech." The words stung. These weren't strangers. They were family friends, Jolene's allies. I kept my face blank, my heart hammering. Of course, Jolene had planted the rumors. Excluding me wasn't enough. She had to poison the room against me, too. I slipped outside to the balcony. The cold night slapped me awake. Boston sprawled before me, its lights blinking against the dark sky. I leaned on the railing, breathing in the sharp air. I wouldn't cry. Not here. Not tonight. Inside, Jolene's laughter rang out, bright and hollow. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling anger solidify into something harder. I remembered what my grandmother once said, "You don't win by being louder. You win by lasting longer." Under the Boston stars, I made a quiet promise. Jolene would regret underestimating me. Morning slid over Boston like a dull gray sheet. I hadn't slept much. After making that quiet promise under the stars, I spent the night replaying every smirk, every whisper, each memory splintering deeper into my skin. By morning, I was back in the same ballroom for the gala's final rehearsal. Everything looked the same, the gleaming chandeliers, the polished marble, but it all felt colder now. The illusion of family had cracked overnight. I sat near the back, hands folded tight in my lap. Elise, the event coordinator, with her clipboard and easy smile, ran through the schedule. When it came time to review the acknowledgments, my heart punched hard against my ribs, then stalled. She read the names in a smooth, practiced voice. "Special thanks to Jolene Whitmore, Gregory Sands, Elaine Mortimer." A pause. Nothing. No mention of me. I waited, thinking maybe she would circle back. She didn't. She smiled and moved right along, as if my months of work meant nothing. Across the room, Jolene was watching me. She didn't even fake guilt, just smiled, slow and satisfied, like she'd proven a point. "This is my world. You're just visiting." After the rehearsal, while people huddled over lukewarm coffee, Jolene drifted toward me. "Hey, Rayanne," she said, voice dripping fake sweetness. "Don't take it personally. Your role was just too minor to highlight. You get it, right?" Her words landed like punches. Too minor. I wanted to laugh, or scream, but I didn't. I smiled so tightly it hurt. "Of course," I said lightly, "wouldn't want to waste time on someone insignificant." For a moment, Jolene's perfect mask slipped, just a flicker. I turned and walked away before she could recover. That evening in my tiny apartment, the silence pressed against me. I pulled out an old battered notebook, the one where I wrote dreams I never dared chase. I didn't write about revenge or anger. I wrote about opportunity, about patience, about building something stronger. Sitting there under the dim light, I realized I had spent years chasing approval from people who would never give it. Maybe it was time to stop asking for a seat at their table. Maybe it was time to build my own. The next time Jolene looked for someone to step on, she wouldn't find a broken woman. She'd find her biggest threat. The night thinned out into the early hours, but sleep never came. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the dim outline of the city skyline through my tiny window. The notebook lay open beside me, blank except for one line scrawled in the center. Stop surviving, start moving. I pulled another file from the drawer, a collection I had quietly built over months. It was filled with discrepancies I had noticed in Jolene's financial statements, misfiled invoices, sponsorships that didn't add up, small things no one else seemed to care about, small things that, strung together, painted a picture she wouldn't want the public to see. I flipped through the pages slowly, my mind sharper than it had been in months. Jolene thrived on appearances. She built her empire on connections, on making people believe she was indispensable. What would happen if those illusions cracked? I didn't want to humiliate her. I didn't even want an apology anymore. I wanted leverage. The following afternoon, the city pulsed with the usual weekday rush. I made my way to a small cafe tucked between two gray buildings near downtown Boston, a place too ordinary for anyone like Jolene to ever notice. I had arranged a consultation under a generic business inquiry. Nothing suspicious, nothing traceable. Sterling Monroe was already seated when I arrived. Dressed simply in a dark blazer and jeans, he looked more like a quiet academic than the influential investor he actually was. His reputation was solid. A man who didn't make public mistakes and didn't suffer fools. Rayanne Whitmore, he greeted me, offering a firm handshake. Or should I just say, Rayanne now? I smiled faintly and sat down. Just Rayanne. We ordered coffees, the usual polite chatter filling the first few minutes, but Sterling wasn't here for small talk, and neither was I. I have information you might find relevant, I said finally, keeping my voice low. Information that could affect several major sponsorship deals tied to next quarter's portfolio. His eyebrows lifted slightly, the only sign of surprise. That's a bold claim. I wouldn't waste your time otherwise, I replied calmly. Sterling studied me for a long moment, as if weighing the risks. Then he leaned back, giving a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Send it when you're ready. If it's as important as you say, it'll be handled. No promises, no threats, just an opening. We finished our coffees without ceremony. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows along the sidewalk as I walked away from the cafe, my steps measured. A chill curled up my spine, not from fear, but from clarity. I had crossed a line that morning without a second thought. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was positioning myself to win. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one reacting. I was the one making the moves. 2 days passed like a gathering storm, quiet but charged with static. I kept my head down at work, answering emails, preparing reports, pretending not to notice the way conversations died when I entered the room. The attack wasn't loud. It was methodical, and it was spreading. That morning, as I adjusted a stack of client files at my cramped cubicle, my phone buzzed. A message from Sable Monroe, my closest ally and one of the few people I trusted. You need to see this. Check your email. My gut twisted. I clicked open the forwarded message. The email was unsigned, sent from a burner account, but the words were unmistakably cruel. It has come to our attention that Rayanne Whitmore may not possess the financial independence or professional credibility required for sensitive partnerships. We advise caution when associating with individuals lacking substantial contributions. My fingers tightened on the mouse. Cold anger rushed through me, fast and sure. This wasn't office gossip. This was a professional execution. Sable appeared at the corner of my desk moments later, her expression grave. This is bigger than rumors, she said under her breath. This is meant to freeze you out completely. I nodded once, No dramatics, no scene, just a silent, steely acknowledgement. Jolene wasn't just trying to humiliate me privately anymore. She was trying to erase me professionally. The rest of the day dragged by in a blur. Every smile from a colleague felt thinner. Every conversation clipped shorter. I said nothing. I finished my work with robotic precision, then packed up and left the building without a glance back. As I pushed open the glass doors into the chilly afternoon air, fate decided it wasn't finished with me yet. There she was, Jolene, standing across the lobby in a tailored ivory coat, chatting breezily with one of the sponsors. She spotted me instantly. Her eyes gleamed with a sick sort of satisfaction. She didn't say a word, just smiled. A razor-thin, calculated smile. I kept walking, my heels clicking sharp against the marble, my gaze locked onto hers without flinching. No confrontation, no theatrics. Just an exchange of silent declarations. I see you, and you'll regret thinking you've won. By the time I reached my apartment that evening, exhaustion coated me like a second skin, but I didn't crawl into bed. I didn't drown in self-pity. Instead, I pulled out my notebook again and began flipping through pages of notes, plans, timelines. The old Rayanne would have hoped for an apology. The Rayanne sitting here tonight knew better. If Jolene wanted a war, she'd get one, but this time it wouldn't be fought in whispers or desperate pleas. It would be fought smart, calculated, and public. If Jolene thought she could erase me with a few rumors, she was about to learn what real erasure looked like. 2 days after I set my plan into motion, the Grand Boston Museum buzzed with the electric tension of another Gala pre-event. I moved through the marble halls with my head held high, my steps measured, ignoring the whispers that still clung to me like fog. Inside the press lounge, velvet ropes separated sponsors, media, and organizers into neat clusters. Cameras flashed. Reporters murmured. Jolene, wrapped in a designer sheath dress, stood poised at the podium like a queen holding court. I leaned against the side wall, arms crossed, watching. With the polished charm of someone rehearsed for battle, Jolene addressed the crowd. "In times of transition," she said sweetly, "it's unfortunate that not every member of a team is able to adapt to the evolving standards of professionalism and dedication. Some misunderstand their roles, some cause unnecessary instability." The words slid like oil over the room, seemingly harmless, but every reporter caught the scent of blood immediately. Heads turned, pens scratched furiously across notepads, cameras tilted subtly toward me. She hadn't said my name. She didn't have to. I felt the heat of dozens of curious stares crawling across my skin. My pulse pounded against my ribs, but I forced myself to breathe slow, deep. This was exactly what she wanted. Me rattled, defensive, cornered. Not today. I pushed off the wall and stepped forward, the room parting around me like a tide. A few reporters straightened, sensing a second headline blooming right in front of them. "I appreciate your attention," I said, voice steady. "But let me say this. Integrity doesn't need defense. It speaks for itself." There was a pause, sharp, bright, before the clicking of cameras began again in earnest. I didn't stay for the follow-up questions. I didn't owe anyone anything. As I exited into one of the side hallways, heart still hammering with controlled fury, I spotted Sable waiting near a service entrance. She slid into step beside me, her voice a low whisper. "Sterling's ready," she murmured. "Just say when—" I nodded once, the muscles in my jaw tightening. Jolene thought she was still controlling the board. She didn't realize the queen was about to fall. If Jolene wanted a war, then I'd make sure she remembered who fired the first real shot. By the time Saturday night arrived, the Grand Boston Museum was already buzzing with the kind of glittering excitement that made headlines. The gala was the pinnacle event of the year, and Jolene strutted through the ballroom as if she owned every shimmering chandelier. I stayed near the back, a glass of water in hand, blending in with the sea of well-dressed spectators. Sable hovered a few feet away, scanning the room with practiced casualness. Jolene floated from sponsor to sponsor, laughing too brightly, shaking hands too firmly. Her lipstick-perfect smile hid the cracks only I could see now, and tonight the floor beneath her was about to give way. Sterling Monroe arrived fashionably late, as always. A murmur ran through the crowd as he crossed the room, flanked by two senior executives. His presence alone shifted the energy, snapping it taut like a violin string. When the stage lights dimmed for the keynote address, Jolene took her place center stage, soaking in the admiration like a plant drinks sunlight. Then came Sterling. He climbed the steps with deliberate calm, adjusted the microphone, and smiled at the audience, a smile colder than the marble floors underfoot. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice clear and commanding, "at Hawthorne Capital, integrity has always been our foundation. Recent developments, however, have called into question the alignment of certain partnerships with our core values." A ripple of confusion moved through the guests. Jolene's smile twitched, faltered. Sterling didn't give her time to recover. "Effective immediately," he continued. "We are withdrawing all sponsorships and affiliations tied to the current leadership of the Whitmore Foundation." Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a champagne flute. The sharp crash punctuated the silence. Jolene froze. Her face, usually a masterclass in poise, now fought to maintain the illusion. I stood still at the edge of the room, heart pounding, savoring the moment. This wasn't a petty victory. It was a necessary one. As questions exploded from reporters and guests surged toward Sterling, Jolene stumbled off the stage, blinking like someone emerging from a blast. I slipped away quietly, moving toward the balcony. Outside, the cold air bit at my skin, but it felt clean, free. Sable joined me, her expression unreadable. Below us, inside the glittering hall, Jolene's empire crumbled piece by piece, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel gloating satisfaction. I just felt weightless. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the space Jolene tried so hard to erase me from. The morning after the gala felt strangely still, like the breathless pause before a building collapses. Boston's streets buzzed as usual, but in my veins there was only sharp, quiet anticipation. By mid-afternoon, I got the text, "Meet me, urgent." Sable. I found her at a small cafe tucked between the brick alleys of Beacon Hill, the kind of place that prided itself on serving lattes with artful foam hearts. She was already waiting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. When I slid into the chair across from her, she didn't waste time. "She reached out," Sable said, her voice low. I blinked. "Jolene?" Sable nodded grimly. "Tried to buy me off. Promised a spot on some new board she's scrambling to build. Stock options, bonuses. A better future," she said. I could imagine Jolene, leaning in with that faux sincerity she'd perfected over the years. It would have worked on someone else, but not Sable. "What did you tell her?" I asked, even though I already knew. Sable's smile was thin but fierce. "I told her loyalty isn't for sale, especially not to someone digging her own grave." Relief swelled in my chest, pushing away some of the bitterness that had taken up residence there. For the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. Later that evening, back at Sable's office, the second bomb dropped. She slid a flash drive across the desk toward me. "It's out," she said simply. "The files we collected, they're circulating." On the small screen, headlines blinked to life. Local news outlets first, then regional financial journals, then national media. Whitmore Foundation accused of financial misconduct. Sources confirm ongoing investigation. Jolene's name was all over it. Sponsor after sponsor pulled out, statements flooding in, each one severing ties as quickly as possible. Her once pristine empire, built on photo ops and fabricated numbers, was hemorrhaging credibility by the minute. I leaned back in the chair, watching the collapse unfold in real time. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel pity either. It was simply inevitable. Jolene had set this fire herself. All I did was stop trying to put it out. In trying to destroy me, Jolene had only set fire to her own empire. The sky outside my apartment was still heavy with early morning gray when the first headlines began flashing across my phone. Every news alert buzzed like a small jolt of electricity under my skin. Whitmore Foundation implodes. Fraud, lies, and lost fortunes. Jolene Whitmore's glittering empire shattered overnight. Page after page, feed after feed, her world unraveled in public. Sponsors severed ties with brutal efficiency. Fashion houses, philanthropic partners, even longtime friends issued sharp statements condemning unethical practices and irreparable breaches of trust. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was truth, undeniable, documented, irreversible. I set the phone down carefully on the table, pressing my hands flat against the cool surface. The sensation grounded me. After so many years of being the footnote, the afterthought, the easy scapegoat, the tide had finally turned. Across town, Jolene must have been scrambling to control the inferno, but from the way the headlines multiplied by the minute, she was already too late. Social media finished what the news started. Within hours, influencers who once tagged themselves proudly beside her wiped their profiles clean. Former collaborators posted thinly veiled apologies for prior associations. Old friends unfollowed, deleted, pretended they never knew her. Jolene posted a statement around noon, a bland corporate apology layered in vague language about miscommunications and misunderstandings. It didn't help. The public tore it apart within minutes, flooding her accounts with demands for accountability, with old screenshots, with receipts no apology could erase. Watching it unfold didn't bring me joy. It didn't even bring relief. It simply felt inevitable. By sunset, I sat on the balcony, a warm mug of tea cooling between my palms. Boston's skyline stretched before me, glowing and indifferent. Sable arrived quietly, carrying 2 small glasses and a bottle of cheap champagne. No speeches, no grand declarations, just a clink of glasses under the open sky. We didn't drink to Jolene's fall. We drank to survival, to the quiet strength it took to stand still while the storm raged, and to the knowledge that sometimes the truth didn't need help. It just needed time. I looked out over the city, feeling the last of the bitterness slip away. Sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's about surviving long enough to watch the truth do what it does best. The weeks that followed unfolded like the slow bloom of spring after a brutal winter. The headlines faded, the anger online cooled, and the city turned its gaze elsewhere. Jolene's name still surfaced now and then, usually tucked into small updates about lawsuits or financial investigations, but the world had moved on. So had I. This morning was different. Standing in front of a modest brick building in South Boston, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. The sign above the door was simple, barely noticeable yet deeply personal. Horizon Strategies. Inside, the space was small but filled with possibility. Mismatched chairs, second-hand desks, a coffee maker that sputtered and hissed like an old friend. I breathed in the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. I wasn't building an empire. I was building something better. A place where ethics mattered more than connections, where transparency wasn't a slogan but a practice. A place built on my own terms. The small team I'd assembled buzzed with energy as they moved between workstations, setting up laptops and pinning vision boards to the walls. They weren't legacy hires or polished socialites. They were hungry, driven, and above all, they believed. Just like I had once wished someone would believe in me. At lunchtime, Sable arrived carrying a tray of deli sandwiches and a cheap bottle of sparkling cider. We gathered around the scratched-up conference table. No media, no photographers, no performative toasts, just people. "I guess this makes it official," Sable said with a grin, raising her plastic cup. I smiled back, the warmth of belonging softening the edges of old scars. "To new horizons," I said simply. Later, after the laughter had faded and the office settled into a quiet hum, I stepped out onto the small rooftop terrace. The city pulsed below me, alive and endless. Somewhere across town, Jolene was packing her life into boxes, slipping into obscurity under the weight of her own deceit. There would be no dramatic farewell, no final confrontation. She had become irrelevant, a shadow passing through someone else's story. And I had no need to chase it. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cool dusk air, feeling a freedom so deep it ached. I hadn't won by breaking someone else down. I had won by refusing to be broken. The sun dipped behind the skyline, casting everything in gold and rose. I didn't need revenge to find peace. I only needed the courage to choose myself every single day. After everything, if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Your worth is never defined by the people who fail to see it. You don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to destroy others to prove your value. Sometimes, the quiet work you do, standing tall, building your dreams brick by brick when no one is watching, that's the loudest declaration you'll ever make. If you're fighting your own battles right now, if you've ever felt invisible or underestimated, I want you to remember, you're not alone, and you're stronger than you think. We don't always get justice on the timeline we want, but the truth has patience, and the truth always finds its way. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated and proven everyone wrong? What would you say today to your younger self who doubted their worth? Drop your story or even just a "I'm here" in the comments. Let's build a space where strength is celebrated, not silenced. If this story touched your heart, leave a or tell me where you're watching from. And hey, if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and hopeful, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss what's coming next. Your voice matters here. Your journey matters. Until next time, keep choosing yourself every single day.